The following is a quote from Ulysses S. Grant from 1879. The Chinese like Americans better, or perhaps hate them less, than any other foreigners. We are the only power that recognizes their right to control their own domestic affairs.
So what does this mean?
Welcome to the United States of Amnesia. We are the podcast that reminds us of what we have forgotten. It is often said that history repeats itself. Mark Twain allegedly said that history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. But over time, many topics have become clouded by biases and oversimplifications, or have become mythologized and now are misunderstood. Misunderstanding means learning the wrong lessons from history, perhaps, or even learning nothing at all. And that can leave us poorly prepared for history's next rhyme. In our last episode, the newly independent United States attempted to develop a reciprocal trading network with China, although a small part of this consisted of the then legal drug, opium. Unlike the British, American merchantmen did not have access to a ready supply. Other products were sold to provide a balance of trade with the U.S. for popular commodities such as tea, silk, and porcelain. In the early part of the 19th century and before, China held a monopoly on tea, which was popular throughout the English-speaking world. Trade was restricted to the southern port city of Canton, now called Guangzhou, although other nearby locations along the approaches were popular for smuggling. Trade was done exclusively in silver at Chinese insistence.
We're going to look at how U.S. missionaries fostered a new elite. This new elite would replace the failing Manchu dynasty, drive them from power, and play a leading role in U.S.-China relations for the majority of the 20th century. More importantly, this new elite would affect U.S. perceptions of China and Asia, and these were based off what will become apparent in the next episode as wishful thinking. For now, the U.S. will be looking at China and the Chinese people in several different and contradictory ways. This would include souls to be saved, hardworking people to be encouraged to immigrate to the United States, and finally people who, by the basis of eugenics, would be unfit to be citizens of the United States, despite all evidence to the contrary. While trade in Canton boomed, the 150-year-old rule of the Manchus was falling apart. It would endure to 1911, 1912, depending on which date you wish to assign its demise to. But as we'll see, the factious environment at the court in Beijing was having a negative impact on China's ability to resist the West and maintain its insulated and isolated society as it had for several thousand years. China was going to discover that it was not actually the Middle Kingdom, despite its insistence otherwise. Initially, not only was the power of the Qing being undermined, it experienced a series of famines, natural disasters, and erosion of its prestige when confronted militarily by Western powers. Trade imbalances as a result of the concessions made during the Opium War handicapped the economy. Also, between 1766 and 1833, the population doubled, while the amount of land cultivated remained fixed. The best was in the hands of wealthy landlords. All of these factors came together in the 19th century to destabilize China internally, and the United States was not necessarily helping matters by sending hordes of missionaries to try to convert people. After being defeated during the First Opium War, China was forced to expand the number of ports available to the British and eventually the United States through its own separate treaty operations. They demanded similar concessions. However, in the 1844 Treaty of Guangxi, it expanded commercial opportunities, but it also permitted the U.S. citizens to buy land to erect churches and hospitals, and overturned a ban on Americans learning Chinese. This permitted the Americans to have greater impact on China than, say, any of the other foreigners who were strictly focused on mainly commercial activities. The limit on Americans learning the Chinese language was meant to limit contact with the Chinese. However, removing this kind of gave the U.S. greater advantages not immediately enjoyed by other foreigners, and would do a great deal to enhance the influence of U.S. missionaries for both positive and negative outcomes over the course of the century. The U.S. Civil War did have a negative impact in terms of affecting trade between the U.S. and China, but we're going to table any discussion of that issue on this episode. What is probably overlooked, at least in the West, is that while the Civil War was going on, the Chinese were experiencing their own even deadlier civil war, which resulted in 20 to 30 million casualties compared to around 1.3 million in the U.S. Civil War.
And I did a little bit of research on that just to put it in some perspective here. The population of the United States at that time in the Civil War, 1860 census, was 31 million people. So it's arguable that in the Taiping Rebellion, the Chinese lost something equivalent to the population of the entire United States.
One whole United States.
Yeah, one whole United States. It was about 5 to 10% of the Chinese population, 20 to 30 million people. And if you were to scale that up for the United States, that would have been the equivalent of the United States losing 1.6 to 3.1 million people during the Civil War. So that just puts you a sense of perspective on how devastating that war was. One of the bloodiest wars in human history. And there are actually some estimates that go as high as 100 million. That sounds very excessive to me, but 20 to 30 million is kind of a best guess for how many people probably died.
We don't even really know for sure the exact number in our own country for our own Civil War. There's always like new discoveries still being made.
The estimate's about 600,000
Yeah.
due to all causes.
Due to all causes.
Combat and disease and things like that.
That's what I've heard, about 650,000.
Yeah, somewhere in there.
The thing, though, to keep in mind here is that unlike our Civil War, Chinese aren't really affecting it. We are having a big impact on China's Civil War. While the rebel army against the combined might of the Manchu Empire, and even they stood against assistance brought by the French and the British, the American influence was probably the most significant because it gave the rebels a kind of collective mythology that was perpetuated by U.S. missionaries. The rebellion was led by Hong Xiuquan, a 4-time failed candidate for the Chinese civil service examinations. Ethnically, he was Han Chinese, but he was also part of a subgroup called the Hakka, a group of northern Han that had fled south in the wake of the Manchu invasion. So not a great deal of love lost between the Hakka and the Manchus, ruling as they are in Peking or Beijing. They had their own customs, which were distinct from even the Han. They did not go in for foot binding for women, and women were actually somewhat less discriminated against than elsewhere. They were forced to work in the fields, so I suppose that's some form of liberation, but not necessarily a beneficial one. Hong Xiuquan's ambition was to become a member of the Chinese civil service, and this involved a 3-day period of continuous essay composition on themes related to Chinese Confucian classics. When he failed the 4th time, he suffered a nervous breakdown and had a vision. And this vision was that he was taken up to heaven, and he encountered all these mysterious figures, and he didn't really understand or assign any particular meaning to this dream until he came across a pamphlet from a Chinese convert to Christianity that was put out by the Mission Society, that he claimed to understand this dream. The people he saw in the dream were the Christian God and Jesus Christ. And Hong was actually the younger brother of Jesus Christ. And he was tasked with creating a heavenly kingdom here on earth, or the Taiping Heavenly Kingdom. And this is all under the influence of American missionaries and American missionary doctrine. No one who was an American missionary actually believed that Hong was the younger brother of Jesus. But the doctrine that they had preached provided them with the basis for understanding his visions and things. Hong's revelation led him to condemn Confucius, which probably, given the fact that he had failed examinations on Confucian philosophy, was something that gave him a bit of delight there.
He claimed that in his vision,
Yeah.
or he later claimed that in
Yes.
his vision, not initially, later claimed that he saw Confucius being punished by his celestial father for leading the people astray.
You know, and what's interesting about this, if we look at parallels in America at the same time, in the 1840s, you have all the burned-over region up in upstate New York where all sorts of religious cults and groupings are coming out of that kind of experience.
Joseph Smith.
The various communal experiments that are happening, this sort of like experiment with kind of religious doctrine. I mean, the people who are coming over from the United States to sort of preach Christianity to the Chinese, they're not going to be part of a group like, say, the Episcopal Church, where there's all sorts of hierarchy and things like that. Congregations are going to be given a great deal of leeway in terms of determining doctrine up to a certain point. And that kind of liberalization, I would say, would probably translates to how this can influence how religion gets restructured, Western religion gets restructured within this Chinese context.
Yeah, apparently Hong, he kind of kludged things together. Right?
Yes.
He was directed to rid the world of demons, including the corrupt Qing government, or Manchu government,
Yeah.
right? And to get rid of Confucian teachings, because Confucius was being punished. But he also managed to fuse Christianity with Taoism and Confucianism and other Chinese, philosophical and religious traditions. And he actually presented it as being sort of a kludge of Christianity and ancient Chinese religious tradition. So it was kind of a Blake mentioned, Joseph Smith and such, right? It was a new
kludger
Christianity
as well.
Right. That was a new Christianity for North America, right? It was, put simply, he was forging a new Christianity for the Chinese context, and that was like the Taiping Christian religion. But anyway.
And I mean, if we want to think about impact here, foreign impacts on society. It is disruptive when you think about what Confucianism represented within China, order, structure, hierarchy. When you start throwing that out, it kind of creates its own disturbances within the society. So to go back to the General Grant quote, are we really not interfering internally with China or not? Is this, are we just saving souls, or are we actually undermining the structure of the society by going in there and doing this? And in this case, I think we kind of are. And this is not the first time that we think we can just go in and all we need to do is just adjust this or that and everything will work perfectly. China will be Christianized and it'll pick up all sorts of advantages that we perceive ourselves as having in the wake of theirs, but not really taking into account what impact that's going to have on the society that exists there.
Christianity is a very powerful force. We did that to the Native Americans in our own country.
Well, if we want to go back even further to a guy who wrote in the year the United States was founded, 1776, that would be Edward Gibbon. Gibbon's claim in chapter 13 of The Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire is that Christianity is what disrupted the kind of allegiance of the Roman Empire and led to its ultimate demise there. So things that we already knew, that we're not really connecting to this great effort that we're undertaking by U.S. Protestant churches dominantly.
But I think you have to ask the question, though, right? And this delves into Christianity and the missionary concept in the first place,
Yeah.
right? I mean, to what extent is this a deliberate effort to undermine Chinese society or anybody else's society? And to what extent is it a good faith, pardon the pun, a good faith effort to evangelize the world, and then it has unintended consequences of undermining other traditions and societies and things. I mean, there's a question to be asked there and discussion to be had. It's a little bit lazy to just say, oh, the missionaries went in to destroy Chinese society by bringing Christianity. Probably not. They probably went in because they thought that Christianity would, I don't know, improve, help
fix
Chinese
things.
society.
Well,
fix things in Chinese
people
society.
Wouldn't be going to hell when they died.
Well, there's that, right? But I mean, also Christianity did bring a lot of teachings, at least the Christianity of that era, brought a lot of teachings that, in fact, did address some pretty awful things that were being done in other societies.
It did improve things like public health. Right. It did, there was a campaign against foot binding, which, it basically involved breaking the bones of women's feet so that they would have these incredibly tiny feet and would be unable to walk very well for the rest of their lives. This was something that was done. It did provide people with scientific and technical training of a sort that they would not have been able to get any other way. It was not necessarily something that the government was sponsoring. But there is a lack of awareness that I think we what you were saying, I think it's more like being unaware or not conscious of the fact that you're going in there and, to borrow a phrase from Star Trek, you're violating the prime directive here. You're going in and you're interfering with a society. You're not really taking into account what impact that could have on that society.
Right, and I think also times have changed, right? In those days, you didn't really think of that or care.
No, you actually
Your goal wasn't to preserve other people's societies in those days, right? It was to go in and change them into yours. It's only more recently in human history that we've actually tried to preserve, maintain, and restore other, whatever term, cultures, civilizations, or that were affected by Western culture so much that they were undermined in some way, right? The idea of not undermining those cultures was not a priority or even a thought.
I don't think it was even a thought.
Not even a thought in those days.
Western society was thought to be superior regardless. So,
sure. So if you undermined it, no damage was done. In fact, that was beneficial.
Yes.
Yes. And you can disagree with that nowadays, and for good reason. But it's the way people thought back then.
And it really wasn't until like the 30s, as far as China goes, when you had Joseph Needham looking at scientific and achievements of China, that anyone had any appreciation that China might have been an advanced society at various times in human history. And they may have fallen behind with this whole Industrial Revolution thing, which they kind of had in this period. Hong initially won over a small number of converts, mainly other Hakka, and established the Society of God Worshippers. Hong spent time with missionaries in Canton in 1847 to gain further insights into Christianity and to provide his movement with a greater understanding of it. Like many adherents, he made the Ten Commandments the bedrock of the Society of God Worshippers. He favored full-body baptism, which kind of illustrates that he's being inspired dominantly by fundamentalist Christians of the Baptist or Methodist variety, as a central feature of converting to Christianity. Opposition to idolatry, a missionary talking point, was adopted by Hong, and this informed the view that his view meant a clear break with China's past as being necessary. In 1850, Hong's Society of God Worshippers had 30,000 members. This alarmed the Manchus. This led to a conflict within the city of Taiping in 1851, where the Qing army was defeated by Hong's ragtag group of followers. This engagement led Hong to even greater heights of anti-Manchu rhetoric and radical thought. The rebels sought to gain territory, and they gained further converts, and by March 1853, they had seized the Ming dynasty's old capital city of Nanking, now Nanjing. 40,000 Manchu men, women, and children were put to death by burning. So much for thou shalt not kill. This would be typical of the brutality, though, associated with the conflict on both sides. That month, the rebels declared the establishment of new nation, the Kingdom of Heavenly Peace, or the Taiping capital, further alarming the court in Peking, now Beijing, though this would not be the last time over the next 11 years that alarm bells would be going off within the Forbidden City. The capture of Nanking assured control of the Yangtze River Valley, allowing the rebels to resupply their capital. Fighting would occur throughout South and Central China until the end of 1864. During the heyday in the 1850s, the Taipings controlled anywhere from 1/3 to 2/3 of all of China. Now, just think about this. This is the result of missionaries coming in there and trying to save souls here. And you're destabilizing 1/3 to 2/3 of the country.
They controlled about 30 million people. They ruled about 30 million people at their height at this heyday that you're talking about. You know, and think about another thing too, right? Is that what you're describing, putting 40,000 people to death in Nanjing, it has an element of genocidal intent to this war. They're trying to kill all the Manchus
and their people that follow them.
And the people that follow them. You're a Manchu. I'm going to kill you, and that's good enough for killing you.
Yeah.
Right? You're not trying to capture you. I'm trying to get rid of you. So it's genocidal. They're trying to remove Manchus from Chinese society entirely.
And to purify.
Purify it.
I mean,
but it's interesting just to note that something supposedly, motivated by Christianity and Christian teachings leads to genocide.
Goes right out the window.
Right out the window and leads to genocide.
Well, what's
based on local biases and prejudices and grievances and things.
The way this is portrayed in Chinese history, particularly with the communists, is that they see him as kind of a precursor to Mao. You know, this if you look at this, the thing that I am finding parallels to is the Cultural Revolution, where you are totally cutting everything down that informed society in the past, and you're attempting to create something totally new and organic that will take its place. And for this reason, when the communists are in, they're not exactly opposed to this kind of activity. They see it as kind of like proto-revolutionary to what the Communist Party was trying to accomplish in the 60s. And I don't think that's really gone away in terms of how they view that. I mean, the Manchus are Manchurians, they're foreigners, so of course if you're Han Chinese, you're trying to avoid that. The problem that occurred and probably prolonged this whole civil war involving Taiping and the Manchus was that the Taipings were not really able to consolidate control over the territory that they conquered, and they faced considerable local resistance. Because it's not just a matter of being anti-Manchu and pro-Han, it's a matter of what is this? You've got, different deities. You've got a rejection of what is basically governed society for like 2,000 years. We're throwing that away, and we're replacing it with this stuff which seems to be changing all the time due to the sort of mystical nature of the revelations that are occurring at the part of the leadership. And the leadership's pretty confused there. Now, on the imperial side, the army's just completely incompetent. This is a problem. And by this I'm meaning the regular army that the emperor funds, because that is not what saves the day here. That is not what changes things here. But to get back to Hong and his attempts here, Hong sought to also involve U.S. missionaries in his efforts in the establishment of this new kingdom, which was characterized by some U.S. missionaries as dazzling, despite the array of carnage and conflict that involved burning Manchurian men, women, and children, and how this might have conflicted with Christian doctrine. One missionary who was very influential with Hong had the name of Iskacher Roberts, and he saw the establishment of the Taiping Kingdom as offering all manner of opportunities to remake and Christianize China. He was part of the type of missionaries that really wanted to save souls at the expense of everything else. There was another trend within American missionaries that involved building hospitals, building schools, building churches, and trying to improve material good of society. Roberts was mainly concerned with souls, doctrine, purity of Christian thought and belief.
The afterlife.
The afterlife.
As opposed to the present life.
And kind of like a sort of purity of doctrine. I mean, he wasn't exactly thrilled with the idea that he has somebody claiming to be Jesus' younger brother, but he does see it's more like a question of, I am getting more opportunities to get people who are familiar with Christianity, and I can kind of fix that as it goes along. He even declined to baptize Hong, even though Hong put a lot of emphasis on baptism. He declined to do that.
Because he didn't like the claim of being
yes,
Jesus' little
he
brother?
thought this was blasphemous.
Yeah, okay.
And it would have been both then and now for someone to make that sort of claim here.
But it was a divine revelation.
Yes. And one person's divine revelation is another person's psychosis.
Yes.
Within the Taiping movement, faith in the United States ran high, and this would be characteristic of reform movements within China for at least until 1949. This would be a consistent characteristic, with the United States serving as a model for the rebel nation. This does not mean, though, as some people thought at the time, and this is a mistake that America would make over and over and over again, just thinking highly of what the United States had achieved did not necessarily mean that everybody was willing to buy into every aspect of American society. The Taipings were inspired by the U.S. to create a totally new social order, which probably would be very alien to Americans at the time. And even now, there were things like rejecting foot binding, which was kind of something that ethnically they were opposed to, and the absolute total subservience of women to the Chinese patriarchy. However, land was to be held in common, and this goes back to the fact that land hunger was very much part of the whole dynamic that's driving this rebellion. Doubling the population over a period of about 100 years and no new land to cultivate and no outlet, that's going to create its own social tensions there. Women were allowed to be soldiers and were able to command other women soldiers in the Taiping army. The sexes were segregated, and they weren't really all that sexually positive in the sense that they didn't encourage sexual intercourse among the people that lived there. They had some funny attitudes about sexual contact. Not unlike some of the communities, say like the Shakers in the United States. I'm not sure that we can draw a direct line to this, but this level of puritanicalism is kind of at odds with what I would say are the dominant themes within Chinese society.
Well, sexual repression happens throughout
Yes,
Christianity.
But elimination. But in China, you're not going to find this. You're not going to find, in the country that has the largest population in the world, they're not necessarily opposed to any sort of sexual intercourse like these guys are. And
so they want total abstinence?
Yeah. Well, they weren't this was kind of where it gets fuzzy here. They didn't like it. They didn't encourage it.
It was icky. It was done from time to time, but it was icky.
It was an ick factor, and you could even get punished for it. What they really wanted, which elements of the leadership, to include Hong's cousin, who was kind of a bit of a visionary and normal to some degree, and he was part of the leadership, they were interested in that with American technology, and they were perhaps sensing that missionaries were supportive of their cause as a whole, in terms of reforming China and putting in what they've considered all these good ideas. Ultimately,
hold on, before you go to that. So I'm getting a very vague idea here of what it is that they look to the United States for. So you're saying that they were inspired by the United States, right? There are aspects of the United States they like. So what I'm kind of hearing from you is They liked the technology that the United States had.
Railroads
Westerners,
in particular.
in some kind of a weird mid-19th century Chinese way. They were kind of a women's rights movement.
Yeah.
No more foot binding. Women were kind of equal.
Yeah.
But I'm not seeing a lot of other U.S.-inspired behavior or attitude here. What was their admiration for the United States then, really? I mean, did they just not understand the United States at all, and they just thought those were the two things that mattered?
They understood the United States less well than we understood China.
Yeah, okay.
They got their view of the United States from the missionaries. No one had any firsthand contact with the United States at all. And so the United States was kind of like what they wanted it to be in their head.
But what did they think it was? What did they want? What was in their head is what I'm trying to ask.
Well,
here.
I think the fact that you didn't have like this aristocratic governance, like you would find at the court of the Manchus, that they didn't like.
We got rid of the king.
Yeah.
They wanted to get rid of the emperor.
That's the foreign emperor, foreign king. In this case, king's not American, the king's British, and there might be some kinship ties there, but it's totally different animal as far as they're concerned. And then they liked railroads. I mean, railroads was something that came up time and time again. The primary means for transportation in China are the rivers, then and now. I mean, that's still an important component of transportation, but they liked this idea of railroads as far as they understood it. And this was something that they were eager to gain technological understanding of and to import to China. It's not clear how they were going to do this because they would have to have defeated the Manchus, in a kind of Armageddon-style battle for them to be able to put something together like a railroad network in China. And they're not really controlling the entire country, and they're controlling bits and pieces of it throughout the period in which they're active. So it's something they're thinking is a good idea, but implementation is something that I don't think they ever got really round to.
And I guess also America brought them Christianity.
Yes.
Which they credit for their entire movement in the first place.
Yes.
So they look to America for that reason as well.
Yes.
So the missionary aspect of it is an important component of why they look to America as a model.
Yes.
They thought that's what America was all about.
Yes. America's leading officials in China were somewhat skeptical, with U.S. Consul Humphrey Marshall actually advocating giving aid to the Manchus. Now, why is he doing this? His purpose and the focus of the American community in China outside of the missionaries is trade. And the Manchus have not been too bad in terms of providing positive trade agreements with America. After the Opium Wars, America's gaining more and more access, more and more favorable opportunities. Trying to expect that you would get the same thing or anything better from, say, a doomsday cult who's being led by a crazy mystic who failed his examinations is probably beyond belief here, beyond anyone's imagination here. He also expected that the U.S. would lose ground trade-wise because he forecast correctly that the French and British would probably come in and intervene on the side of the Manchus, and they would get even more concessions than the United States would, and some of these concessions would probably come at the expense of U.S. influence on the trade arrangements. As it turned out, the predictions that Marshall was making were the correct ones. The French and British, first of all, they attacked China while it was engaged in the Taiping Rebellion, and then they got additional concessions as a result of this. Not so much at American expense, but they did get additional concessions. The other thing that Marshall got correct was that the British and the French did come in and assist the Manchus in the effort to squash the Taipings. This actually led to his termination by the State Department, him sending these rather alarming dispatches. Now, as we're going to see in subsequent episodes, this would not be the last time that this would happen, that being right led to a U.S. official being cashiered because he knew too much. In fact, this is kind of a leitmotif that we will find.
A pattern.
A pattern of behavior by the U.S. government with regard to people telling them things that they don't want to hear.
So let me ask you then. So Marshall was fired.
Yes.
For being right about France and Britain
Yes.
currying favor with the Qing dynasty, the Manchus.
Yeah.
And he was fired for saying that. What was it that people in Washington wanted to hear? That there was no threat from France or Britain? That what was he being fired?
He was actually advocating that what was necessary was that we needed to send troops and forces to support the Manchus against the Taipings.
And that's what he got
And he
fired
said
for
that if we didn't do this, the British and French are going to come in
and do it. Okay,
yes.
Gotcha. All right.
And this was what Washington did not want to hear. They did not want to hear that. I mean, when you think about what the American military looked like, the idea that, I mean, hard enough to go and wage war in Texas and Mexico, but imagine trying to bring forces all the way over and provide some sort of military assistance to China when at the time you're dealing with California is just barely a state. You have San Francisco as the major metropolitan area. And how do you get forces out there anyway? I mean, he's not wrong, but it's an impractical thing given the limitations of the time.
What year are we talking about?
We're talking about like the 1850s here.
Okay, before the Civil War.
Yeah, before
and the U.S. military is very small.
Yes.
Right? It's basically intended to go fight the Indians and those kind of things. You know, I mean, it's not a big force at all. It's not like the Army we have today. The Navy wasn't very big either. So, I mean, the reason I'm bringing that up is, I mean, you know, you're dealing with a country with, how many people were living in China at the time? 400 million people or something?
Yeah.
You gonna send a few thousand guys there, tops?
Yeah.
That would have stretched your resources, send a few thousand troops over there.
If you had to send...
Well, what are they going to do exactly in this whole gigantic...
Yeah, what's the plan?
War,
Yeah.
Right? Yeah, I mean, that's a fair point.
I mean, we're going to see...
I don't know if it's worth getting fired over, but, you know, okay.
We're going to see this happen subsequently when we get to World War II. And kind of U.S. officials then basically making comments about the state on the ground here and how receptive the U.S. is to that and what that leads to. The rebellion is eventually put down by a combination of forces. The British and French, went in, defeated the Chinese in the Second Opium War, burned and looted the Summer Palace in Beijing, and then eventually you get an army made up of regional forces, not the Imperial Army. I mean, the distinction here is, if you want to do a parallel, the Continental Army, it's not the centralized army. It's basically a pickup game where you have Zhang Guoquan leading this and being assisted by General Gordon, who was later killed in Sudan. They're basically going in and putting this rebellion down.
The British general.
The British general.
Chinese Gordon.
That's why
he got the name Chinese Gordon
from this. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So the main part of the rebellion is put down in 1864, but it's still going on.
By the Zhang army.
Yes.
Is the army you're talking
yes,
about. Not the Imperial Army.
Not the Imperial Army, because he's going around recruiting and training from the regions.
Right.
It's a provincial army.
There's a final siege of Nanjing, which the Zhang army eventually wins.
Yes.
And Hong dies during the siege.
Yes.
He ate wild vegetables and contracted food poisoning and died of that during the siege. Pretty soon after that, Nanjing fell. But then you're saying that the rebellion did continue, though. It wasn't actually over then.
There were pockets that continued on, pockets of resistance. And again, this is because you're not really, the ability for them to consolidate control over the areas that they went into, this just didn't happen. And if you look at a map of this, there are areas that they control, and then there's areas in between the areas that they control that they never actually were able to operate under successfully.
Apparently, the last Taiping army was not wiped out until 1871.
Yeah.
So that was 7 years after Hong's death and the fall of Nanjing. So
yeah.
it took a while.
Yes. So, in the aftermath of the Taiping Rebellion, clearly things were not going well for the Manchus. And so, turning our attention to what's happening in the court in Peking or Beijing, there were people in China at the court, not unlike the founders of the Meiji Reform movement in Japan, that saw the necessity of acquiring Western technology and also initiating reforms throughout the empire. However, unlike these Japanese counterparts, these efforts were largely frustrated by other court officials who were more traditional-minded. Japan did not really face the same difficulties, and as a result, it was able to acquire Western technology, initiate Western reforms, and able to defeat China during the Sino-Japanese War of 1894 to 95, which heralded its emergence as a great power, and provided, again, additional shockwaves to the court in Peking there. But what probably was a bigger shortcoming was that these repeated failures only served to undermine faith in the Manchu government and rule as the 19th century wore on. The West, in contrast, offered a number of alternatives, not all of which involved declaring oneself as a kinsman of the Christian God. And this involved people from China actually immigrating to the United States. This was something that previously in earlier centuries would have resulted in being called a traitor or being referred to as committing treason. So Chinese were able to immigrate to the United States in any significant numbers. It would have been in response to the gold rush. The 1849 gold rush in California brought along a response from China.
Yeah, a lot of Chinese came to the United States, came to California.
And mining was like a profession that they kind of made their own when they came over here. They were actually better at it than Americans because they would patiently look for ore. They would go through and not just look for nuggets, but they would concentrate on dust, gold dust as well. And they were actually able to be very profitable with that and other forms of ore extraction. This became kind of like a signature profession for them during this period.
So do you know, did they develop that expertise when they came over here, or did they bring it with them from China?
They brought it with them.
So these are guys who had done mining in China.
Yeah.
They brought over to be miners.
Yeah.
And they had good techniques.
Yeah.
Okay.
Dominantly, they're all going to be from the south.
Okay.
Southern China is going to be, this is the gateway to the world, not only gateway into China, but it's the gateway out of China. And it's because trade is dynamic down there, and it promotes an attempt to go and leave. And the people who are doing this are fleeing from this society that's falling apart. They're also fleeing from, the Taiping Rebellion is actually acting as a spur to promote. I mean, do you really want to wake up one morning and find yourself being hustled into some sort of vat where you're going to be burned to death with your nearest and dearest here, or are you going to go and try and make a living elsewhere? So
20 or 30 million people died. That's a bad stretch of years to be in
China.
In China,
yes.
Yeah, you could see why you might want to leave.
Maybe I want to go find some gold over in the New World here.
Somewhere with less dying.
Yes.
Yeah.
So Chinese immigration increased in the 1860s. And again, this is coming from the southern part, the area around Canton. Population is land hungry, and there's a desire to avoid the Taiping Rebellion.
And there were railroad jobs.
Well, we're getting to that.
Okay.
We are getting to that. This is going to be like a huge opportunity for them. So American managers were impressed by the work ethic of Chinese workers. And like you said, they were able to pay them less than regular Europeans, and this makes them very popular for the railroad. They're actually more self-sufficient because the Chinese are basically, they're not given the same level of support, but they're able to do a lot more work. They have a higher, like I said, a higher work ethic. But what we end up with, and I found this statistic remarkable, 90% of the workers involved in the construction of the Transcontinental Railroad were Chinese. 90%.
I didn't realize it was that many.
I didn't realize it was
I
that
knew
many.
there were a lot of them.
I knew there was a lot, and I felt like it might be concentrated for one of the railroads that were involved in the development of the Transcontinental Railroad. But I went to a number of different sources to research that, and I kept getting the best I could do that wasn't 90% was 80%, and that's still rather high when you think about it.
Question about that.
Yes.
So the Transcontinental Railroad came from both directions.
Yes.
Are we talking about the part built from the west towards
From the
east,
west,
right?
yes.
From the east towards the west was not full of Chinese laborers there.
No.
Right? Yeah, it was that part. Yeah.
It's Union Pacific. It's South Pacific. It's those lines that are actually employing them. And this is actually the most dangerous and challenging environment that you have to contend with. The most unforgiving environment to try to lay track down.
Mountains,
blizzards, yes. Now,
canyons, all sorts of
the
things.
Chinese did not emerge from this unscathed. There was a high casualty rate, and people think that it might be as many as 20,000 people perished in the construction of the Transcontinental Railroad. Chinese people.
Chinese people.
Yes, just Chinese people.
Were these the miners that were employed now to work on railroads, or was this a different group of Chinese people that came over? What?
It's not clear to me. They did bring over people
To work the railroad.
to work the railroads.
Okay.
But this was not something that they did, like, oh, let's go get some Chinese people. There were Chinese people working the railroads, and then because of good work ethic, low pay, they became more popular. And so the railroads are bringing over workers.
Well, also, if you're going to build a railroad, I think probably miners are a good source of skilled labor for that because, you're going to dig tunnels, things like that, right? You need guys that know how to swing a sledgehammer and a pickaxe and these kind of things, right?
Yes.
So, I mean, they're going to be good at tunneling and
Dynamiting.
these kinds of things, right? So, I mean, they'd be a natural source of labor, I think, for a railroad.
Particularly if they've been there for a while. After the Transcontinental Railroad was completed in 1869, the sentiment towards the Chinese declined. Anti-Chinese sentiment increased throughout the 1870s. Now, this was initiated by other blue-collar workers who resented the willingness of the Chinese to work for lower wages and with fewer benefits, who were kind of pricing them out of the market, so to speak. This was at the time where, and this was by no means limited to the Chinese or even the West Coast, but this was a tactic that was widely practiced on the East Coast and the Midwest, where various ethnic groups are played off each other to the benefit of the owners of factories and businesses. Similar to what we see today within the U.S. political system, where certain groups are randomly demonized to achieve the same results.
Was the resistance to them, the negative view of them, an economic one strictly, a labor issue, or was there a xenophobic aspect as well?
I'd say it's both
Yeah.
because you're looking at the other. You're looking at people whose, it's one thing to have
very different people culturally. They
Yes.
look very different. They dress very different. All sorts of things, right?
Well, you would have this over on the East Coast, and I mean, like the big example of this is Irish versus Poles here. The Irish are coming over, and they're already over here after the potato famine. They continue to come over throughout the 19th century, doing menial jobs. But then you're getting people brought in from Eastern Europe who do look strange to them, who do, even though they have the same religion, they go to different Catholic churches. They appear strange. They don't have the same language and so forth. But the Chinese are that on steroids.
I was going to say, it's got to be next level.
It's the next level.
Yeah, right.
Because there's They don't look like
Right.
they do.
They're very different.
They are
very different cultural and historical
They're not
background.
just different; they're very different. Exactly.
You've got some eugenics still in there too.
Oh yes, oh yes. I mean, even when in the early stages for the railroads, the average height for a Chinese worker was 4'11".
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. And so they're looking at this, the owners, and they're like thinking, can this actually work? And I mean, there was an exchange with between one of the railroad tycoons and a counterpart, and one of them said, well, they built that wall over there, so maybe they can build a railroad, referring to the Great Wall over in China. But physically, they were very different from what you would find in the Europeans, and even somewhat smaller compared to the average European settler, average American, which vary depending on ethnicity and a lot of other factors. So, yes, xenophobia, eugenics, all of these factors are coming in. And eugenics, because we're seeing that emerge because of Darwin's Origin of Species that's coming out in 1858. You may not believe in the fact that people are descended from animals, but you do take a kind of view about various peoples that people will take on, even though they're going to reject, natural selection and all these other things that are happening.
Well, they're going to reject it for humans versus animals, but they're going to adopt it, embrace it for humans versus humans.
Yeah, humans
There's
versus
natural selection between different races and
Yes.
such, right? They're going to dive in on that because that suits their purposes.
And races is a word that is used far more broadly. You can speak of the Anglo-Saxon race. You
can talk about the English race, the Irish race, the German race.
Yeah.
The Italian race. Those are different races in the parlance of the day.
And these were supposed to have innate qualities to them.
Yeah.
So what had happened was that free and easy immigration was permitted under something that was called the Bulmingame Treaty that came out in the late 1860s. By 1870, there was a Naturalization Act that was passed that extended citizen rights, at least in theory, to African Americans. It banned Chinese naturalization. So just to see where they are in the hierarchy there, they are not given even the remotest possibility of becoming citizens then, because it's assumed that Asians could never be assimilated into U.S. society, and they banned Chinese from voting or even serving on juries. So you're not a citizen. You never will be. You will never have those rights of citizenship. And then in 1875, and there was a basis for this. There was a fear about trafficking, but immigration of Chinese women was forbidden. And it was widely thought that if women are coming over here, they're coming over to be prostitutes. Some of them were, but that kind of denied people the ability to form family units, to create family organizations, and things like that.
It was forbidden by the Page Act.
The Page Act, yes. And then acquiring land, a right which U.S. people enjoyed in China, was forbidden as well in certain, not under federal law, but under local laws in various areas out west.
So you want to put down roots and raise a family and you're Chinese, we want you to go back to China and not do it here. That's what we're basically saying.
Well, we want to exploit you.
Well, sure.
And that's the end of that.
And then when you're done being exploited, go back home and set up your family and your...
Well, die. I don't know.
Well, okay, but I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about what the Page Act is essentially doing.
Yeah,
the Page Act is essentially saying if you're going to do those kind of things that Americans are going to do,
here.
You can't do them here. Go back to China and do those things.
Yes. So, I mean, we're talking less than second-class citizenship here. We're talking several notches below. And then just to sort of illustrate this further, Plessy versus Ferguson, which is a famous Supreme Court decision that established the notion of separate but equal, there was a dissent by a guy named John Marshall Harlan, who was one of the justices, who objected to this and spoke out in favor of, African Americans ought to be able to enjoy full rights as citizens. In this dissent that he put out, he really came down hard on Chinese and saying Chinese can never be Americans. that he would say African Americans, yes, but Asians, no. They're just too far removed from the experience. And I mean, this is where you get this notion that people are kind of like pre-programmed, or that that your ethnicity determines your attitude and your ability to function within certain societal norms there.
I mean, it really treats different ethnicities as if they're different breeds of dogs.
Yeah.
It really does. I mean, that's an analogy
it totally
to use.
Dehumanizes them.
Yeah, it's like, this breed of human behaves this way and that breed behaves that way. It's not so much, that's pretty much what you're saying.
Yes. And this is your reward for building this Transcontinental Railroad. You have worked, you've given lives, and we're going to treat you less than former slaves. Former enslaved people are going to be living life better, and that's pretty bad.
Yeah.
Nobody wants to be living in the South, but we're going to actually take active measures to prevent you at the federal level from enjoying any sort of benefit of living here.
Yeah.
Plessy was decided, by the way, in May of 1896.
Yeah. So this is the sentiment that goes on throughout. There's this sense of yellow peril, as it was called, that somehow or the other Asians are going to come in and totally change society, totally alter things. This sounds familiar, doesn't it?
Yes.
Sounds like stuff we're hearing now.
This has come up before and came up since, didn't
Yes.
it? Yes.
It comes up. And yeah, maybe it does, but it's still, it doesn't undermine things to the degree that people think that they are going to be undermined. Like we got this in the New York mayoral campaign where, New York City is going to come under Sharia law. And meanwhile, Mondami is campaigning in gay bars, So yeah, Sharia law. It's the same sort of thing, though.
There are those who believe that this arrival of culturally and ethically different people is intrinsically weakening to society.
Yeah.
And there are others who say it's intrinsically strengthening to society. And then there's probably some who say it's kind of neutral. It depends on the person, right? But that's the debate that goes on between these two different ways of thinking about other ethnicities coming into your little world you live in.
When you look at immigration that's going on with these other groups, you might find people that are coming over trying to preserve as much of the old country as possible, regardless of what continent we're talking about. But then the second generation tends to want to assimilate more and become in tune with the society more than, say, the initial group that's in there. It's not a hard and fast rule. There is a certain sense that you get back then about people being part of a community of immigrants.
Well, stereotypically what tends to happen is the first generation comes in, they're from the old country, and of course they're from there, so they retain the old ways. They may not learn, in the case of the United States, they may not learn English or not be very good at English.
Yeah.
The next generation is the first one born in our case, the United States. That generation grew up with the people from the old country, so they tend to be bilingual, but they tend to also be more immersed in the society in which they grew up. And then their children, the grandchildren of the original immigrants, become far more American. They may lose the old country's language. They may not identify with the old country very much at all anymore, right? I mean, this is how this kind of assimilation works.
This is how this would be the case that I have seen in my own family.
And it happens with all sorts of ethnic groups coming into the country over and over again. It's not tied to any particular ethnic group, having that experience. Yeah. It's the American way.
It's the American way. And then those people will get assimilated, and then they'll try to say that the new immigrants that are coming here can never become part of America.
Because the American tradition also is no one after me.
No one after me, that's right.
I should be the last immigrant.
I should be the last one.
Yeah.
The problem with China coming to America, all these Chinese people coming to America, resulted in the first limitation on immigration, and that was in 1882. And this was the Chinese Exclusion Act. And this was passed in response to complaints by European American workers. and it expressly prohibited the further immigration of Chinese workers. This wasn't a quota. No one could come and do this. And it left them outside the protection that was provided by law to any of the other groups that existed in the United States.
So if you were here already,
yeah,
you had less protection under the law than other
yes,
people here did.
yes.
Okay.
That was the original intent for this.
And what does that mean? What does it mean in terms of less protection?
Well, you could be singled out. I mean, at the time, when we're talking 1882, you do have the 14th Amendment that's in existence, and there is, of course, the Equal Protection Clause. What we're going to find is the Chinese are going to respond to this by forming professional groups, societies, etc., and they would litigate this. And the first time that equal protection, and this goes up before the Supreme Court, the first time that equal protection becomes evoked as doctrine is in one of these cases involving limitations that the city of San Francisco had placed on the operation of Chinese laundries. And they were intended to keep Chinese people from being able to work in the laundry business by putting up statutes and things, health restrictions, and so forth. And they formed an association, the people affected by this, Chinese people affected by this, and they litigated it. And basically they disputed this on the basis of the Equal Protection Clause under the 14th Amendment. The suit that drew on the Equal Protection Clause in the 14th Amendment was the 1886 Yik Vu versus Hopkins suit that was heard at the Supreme Court level.
So we passed a law saying that you didn't have equal protection if you were Chinese.
Yes.
In violation of the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th
exactly.
Amendment. So how'd they do in court?
They won.
Yeah, okay.
I mean, basically, it did not overturn the Chinese Exclusion Act, but it overturned this local restriction in San Francisco that limited their ability to be able to set up laundries and operate them.
Because you're allowed to regulate who comes into the country.
Yes.
You are allowed to do that.
Yes.
And you can do it by nationality.
Yes.
That's not covered by the Constitution. Says you have to let everybody in regardless of nationality.
There is.
But once you're here,
yes.
you're supposed to have equal protection
under
of
the law.
Once you're here, yeah.
Which, again, if we're talking about current events, this is something that we see people questioning. But going back to the time in which these protections were put in as constitutional amendments, and it's not that much different then and now. I mean, it's still people want to question this and want to somehow make it less available, make freedoms, laws, restrictions of government less available to people. Meanwhile, back in China, U.S. missionaries continued to increase their presence throughout the 19th century. Although many Americans regarded the Chinese people as undesirable in the United States, this sentiment did not exclude armies of missionaries dispatched to preach the gospel, operate hospitals and schools, and send some of the more promising students of these schools to America for further instruction. This is one avenue of access to America that was not expressly forbidden by the Chinese Exclusion Act. And this would be kind of an avenue that people in China, which was, as it developed, its own kind of Western-oriented elite, would use as a means of gaining an impression of the world through United States eyes. However, even with this approach to try and better the lives of people in China, Western missionaries were still regarded with suspicion by a large percentage of the population. In 1899 to 1901, the Boxer Rebellion specifically targeted missionaries during the uprising.
We will discuss the Boxer Rebellion in a later episode in much more detail, but for now, let's summarize it briefly.
For listeners who don't know, there was an uprising in China against foreign influence from 1899 to 1901 called the Boxer Rebellion. It was an uprising by a group called the Society of Righteous and Harmonious Fists. and they did Chinese martial arts to practice. They thought that by practicing those martial arts, they would make them immune from Western bullets and artillery ammunition, which it did not do, to their displeasure when they wound up fighting with the West. Anyway, but when they did these movements, the Westerners called that, in English, they called it Chinese boxing. And so they became known as the Boxers. And the Boxers were quite a violent movement. They murdered European diplomats in Chinese cities. They engaged in terrible attacks on these missionaries that they were so upset with because they thought they were undermining and destroying Chinese society. They would hold mass executions where they would take missionaries and behead parents in front of their children, and then the children as well, and all sorts of awful things happened during this. The attack started in 1899, and by 1900, they had besieged the foreign legations in Peking, which is now known as Beijing, of course. There were something like 900 European and Japanese and American civilians, soldiers, Marines, sailors, various military personnel in Peking, and also about 2,800 Chinese Christians, because the Boxers were also slaughtering all the Chinese Christians they could get their hands on because they didn't like the Christian influence in China. And it's an epic story, the defense of the legations, as they were called there. There's a movie, 1963 movie, Charlton Heston, I think David Niven's in it.
Ava Gardner.
Ava Gardner, 55 Days at Peking, which is a fun movie if you've never seen it. They held out for 55 days, that's where the title comes from, against overwhelming numbers of Chinese. It's actually one of the most amazing stories in Western and Japanese and American military history. Eventually what happened is the Eight Nations Alliance formed. The Eight Nations were the United States, Japan, and 6 European countries. So that was Austria-Hungary, Italy, France, the United Kingdom, Russia, and Germany. All of whom sent troops, and they launched a couple of expeditions from the Chinese coast up to Peking to relieve the legations, the siege of the legations. The first one was defeated on the way. The second one was much bigger. It made it. It lifted the siege of the legations at Peking. And that eventually, the occupation of Peking eventually led to the collapse of the Boxer Rebellion. And actually, Westerners and the Japanese gained even more influence over China than they had before. So in that sense, the Boxer Rebellion completely backfired. A lot of the Boxers, at Western insistence and Japanese insistence, were executed for what they had done, killing missionaries and things like that. But it was quite a bloody affair, quite a dramatic affair, quite an interesting part of Chinese history and of Western and Japanese and American military history.
So in the Japanese, they had kind of acquitted themselves well within the Sino-Japanese War, which had occurred 2 or 3 years before.
1894, 1895
yeah.
was the Sino-Japanese, the first Sino-Japanese War, as it was called.
Yes. And to the extent that people in the West were actually thinking, again applying eugenics, that the Japanese could become white people as a result of taking on all these Western values.
There's a very good book that I recommend for anyone who's interested called The Siege at Peking by, if I have the author's name right, Peter Fleming, I think his name is. I forget when the book was written, but it's quite a good book on the siege. And one thing he remarks about is how the Japanese, who the Europeans and Americans had looked down upon as being, an inferior race, for the first time were fighting alongside the Europeans and the Americans against the common enemy. And they were extremely impressed with the Japanese professionalism, military professionalism, and tactical abilities, these kinds of things. And the Japanese emerged from the Boxer Rebellion and the defense of the legations at Peking with a very enhanced reputation among the other great powers. They really came on the scene as a great power in their own right.
Yes,
at around that time.
And this is only 20 years after the Meiji Revolution, more or less.
That was 1868 was the restoration,
yeah.
So you're talking about 32 years later, I guess, right?
Yeah, 32 years.
32 years is when the Boxer
Yeah.
Rebellion was at its peak in 1900, so around that, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, so 30 years. But that's kind of remarkable to become a great power in that period of time. Before that, you were basically dealing with a country that was afraid to know what to do about Matthew Perry landing.
Yeah, the emergence of Japan on the scene as a great power is an amazing story in its own right. We don't have time for that here, so we'll press on. But it is a fascinating story.
It will come to play a greater role in our story later on.
Okay.
As we get into World War II, the World War II era.
So Boxer Rebellion gets put down, 1901, and then?
Meanwhile, Christianity is becoming far more influential among certain groups within China. And one of the people that we might want to focus in at this point is Charlie Soong, who is a remarkable figure in so many ways, and one whose own role in the U.S. and China story is going to be remarkable, and his family even remarkable still. In some respects, the Soong dynasty is going to take the place of the Manchus in many ways here. So he was like a lot of people that we've looked at. He was from the southern part of China. He was and like the members of the Taiping Rebellion, he was a Hakka Han. By 1894, he was a successful businessman in Shanghai, a city that was more or less founded on the backs of foreign trade. He was also a member of a revolutionary organization. He got his start coming to America. He kind of stowed away on a ship after working in his uncle's shop in Boston, went there to North Carolina, worked in a printing office, and then from there, he was picked up by Methodists who saw him as someone who could become a missionary and a minister. And so he got a crash course at what later became Duke University, and then subsequently he went to train for the ministry at Vanderbilt. When he returned to China, like I said, he did not really find missionary work all that fulfilling and gradually drifted into, he still stayed in touch with missionaries, but he found it more profitable to print English language Bibles and American technical manuals and instruction books at cut-rate prices because he knew certain ways that he could do this at a lower cut-rate cost than many of his competitors within there. With this, he joins a revolutionary group called the Red Gang, and this organization had its roots in movements to reinstate the Ming Dynasty. Again, we're getting into this Chinese Han hostility towards the Manchus here. But now it had emerged in part due to Western influence as a Republican revolutionary force. So 1894 was a big year for Charlie Soong because he made the most important connection in his life, and this is when he met Sun Yat-sen at a Sunday service in a Methodist church in Shanghai. Two men are kindred spirits. They both share Western education, Hakka ancestry, and the Christian faith, and a burning ambition and craving for change in China. Perhaps most importantly, they were both members of anti-Qing triads, and they became good friends, and Charlie started funding Sun's revolutionary campaigns. The first of these failed in 1895, in which Sun initially flees to Hawaii, which was then not part of the United States and not subject to the Chinese Exclusion Act. Sun actually had a great deal of fondness for Hawaii. He referred to it as his spiritual home on numerous occasions. And he was educated at the Iolani School and what later became the Punahou School, whose most famous alumnus is Barack Obama.
So Sun actually first arrived in Hawaii when he was 10 years old. When he began his education there, he attended secondary school. He attended Iolani, as you mentioned, and the reason I'm bringing this up is it just shows, again, there is another missionary connection, even though it's outside of China, where Iolani was actually founded as the principal school of the Anglican Church of Hawaii, which would later become part of the Episcopal Church of the United States when Hawaii became part of the United States. That was the official church of the Kingdom of Hawaii at the time. So there's that angle. He graduated from Iolani, and then he went to what at the time was known as Oahu College. It later was renamed Punahou School. He attended that for a semester. Now, Punahou was founded by New England missionaries, Congregationalists, back in 1841. So again, you had Christian missionary influence directly or indirectly on him during his years of secondary education, certainly. And by 1883, he had become so interested, Sun had become so interested in Christianity that his brother, who he was living with in Hawaii, sent him back to China to try to stop him from becoming Christian. His brother didn't want him to do that. But it took, and Sun became Christian. And then that leads on to what you were talking about there in the 1890s.
Yes. So after the first failure to overthrow the Manchus, Sun spent a lot of time in exile, going back and forth, North America, Hawaii, Japan, Europe, other parts of Asia, seeking funds from the Chinese diaspora in many cases, and trying to overthrow the Manchus in order to replace them with a republic. Now, this republic is not, it may be called something not unlike what we call ourselves, but he was not necessarily intending to replicate the United States, at least not at first. Sun basically thought that the Chinese were not prepared for self-government. He insisted on a period in which there would be sort of control at the top. Revolution would be handled at the top. The development of democratic traditions would come from the top. He did favor a similar governmental organization. There would be a executive, there would be a legislative, and there would be a judicial branch, but he also saw something as two other branches, one that would be in charge of purification, kind of getting rid of vice, suppressing vice, and the other one into promoting needed reforms. Now, how this would all work together, I'm not sure how that would work together, given our own understanding of how the three-part system of government would work, but these were supposed to be co-equal to the other ones. So,
well, and remember, too, it's fair to say that he was dealing with a very corrupt government in China that he was seeing around him. The Qing dynasty was riddled with corruption. And incompetence and all of that, right? So you can see why he would think that was a major thing that his new government would have to address.
Yes.
Because that was a root and branch problem in Chinese society at the time, and he saw it.
Still is.
Well, yeah. So, it makes sense that he'd want to do something like that. It would be different from trying to found the United States, certainly, wouldn't it?
He would also frequently cite American historical figures such as Washington, Jackson, and Lincoln when discussing his revolutionary goals. And eventually, the dates on this it's either 1911 or 1912 when we can date the Manchus as being overthrown, but they were, and Sun was proclaimed as president of the Provincial Republic.
He proclaimed the new government at the end of 1911.
Yes.
I think is where the difference comes in. And then the last emperor of China, right? He finally abdicated in February 1912. So the dynasty ended in 1912, but actually they were, for all practical purposes, already overthrown by 1911. It's only about a less than 2-month difference, but that's where the confusion comes in.
And given where the emperors were, most of them were like infants or children or minors at any event in the last 3 or 4.
The Dowager Empress ran China, right?
Yes.
At the time, and because the emperor was in his infancy.
Yes.
Yeah.
And she kind of liked that.
Yeah.
She liked the fact that she had someone who really had no opinions and could be kind of distracted by the court culture.
The movie The Last Emperor is about him,
yes,
right?
Yes.
Pu Yi was the last.
Yes.
Yeah.
Who had a very interesting career of his own there.
Yeah.
But
that's for another time.
That is for another time.
Sun Yat-sen, Soong are influenced by U.S. Christian missionaries.
Yes.
We've established that, right? They go to China. They want to clean China up. They want to get rid of the corrupt Manchu government. They want to create a republic of some kind, right? So to what extent is that a a Christian effort? To what extent is it a Chinese patriotic nationalist effort on their part? I assume that those two overlap somehow.
They do.
And you can explain this to me now, right? That's what I'm
Yes.
getting at here, right? So what's the relationship between those two? In other words, if the U.S. missionaries are coming because they want to evangelize everybody, I don't know that they care that much whether it's a Manchu dynasty or a new Republic of China while they're doing that, just as long as everybody gets evangelized, right? If Soong and Sun come and they want to then create a new governmental system there, right? That's two different things. So equate those to how you're saying the U.S. missionary influence had something to do with creating this new China. Just lay that out. I mean, I can think of things, but I don't know what you're thinking.
Well, my thinking is that there's another element that we always have to consider when dealing with both of them, and that is the Manchus are regarded as an alien invading force that's ruling over Han China, and they're Manchurian. And that is a distinction which both men would have appreciated, particularly if they're Hakkas, which means that they were like kicked out of the north, forced to relocate to the south, not unlike, say, the Acadians in Louisiana, and that the name actually means visitor. They were meant to go back, but they never did. So there's an ethnic aspect to this. The missionaries are providing a sort of religious dimension to them, but this dimension is also providing them with an alternative. The only alternative that's handy, I would say, to what is an alternative to Manchu rule here. So that it's a republic, that's probably also Western influence, because a republic had never been something that had existed in China before that. It had always been rulers or warlords or something of that ilk. So the missionaries are kind of giving them that space to think about that form of government and implementing that form of government on China.
But that's not an intrinsically Christian issue, is what I'm trying to get at.
Well, they saw the two as overlapping.
The missionaries did.
No, Sun and Soong.
Okay, so
Yes.
if you're going to take example from the Americans about how to run a government,
Yes.
you're also going to take example from them on what religion to have and how to think
Exactly.
religiously.
Yes.
Therefore, to them, it's inextricably connected.
Yes.
Americanization, or whatever you want to call it, or at least some kind of an American-inspired new form of government, is intrinsically linked to also Christianity, Christian principles, and these kinds of things.
And this is going to be something that, as we'll see in the next episode, that this idea of Christianizing China becomes linked to not so much Sun Yat-sen, but definitely to Chiang Kai-shek and his wife Mei Ling.
And did the Christian example influence them in terms of their idea of cleaning society up and the corruption and all of that? Is that part of it?
It is part of it, but they were to prove themselves just as corrupt.
Sure.
Once they achieve power.
We're not there yet, though.
We're not there yet.
I'm just talking about their thinking at this time.
Their thinking at this time is that they're going to clean things up and that society is going to be on a more equitable basis.
And there's a Christian influence in
Then
that.
there's a Christian influence in there.
All right. Okay.
In terms of, say, social justice and things of that ilk.
Okay.
Charlie Soong and Sun Yat-sen are products of this missionary culture, this U.S.-sponsored missionary culture, which succeeded in overthrowing the 2,000-year-old imperial system. Subsequently, and we'll look at this in the next episode, Soong's children, who are products of this missionary educational system, this U.S. missionary educational system, who would be educated both in China and the United States, would use their connections that the missionary culture provided to sustain themselves in China with American political, military, and media support. The Manchu dynasty had fallen, but I think we can say that the Soong dynasty would dominate Chinese foreign and domestic relations with the United States and the world for the next 60 years. So in the next episode, the Soong family, particularly the daughters, will take the lead in directing Chinese policy. These women, educated in America at Methodist schools and understanding how to approach the Protestant population, will prove very adept in shaping U.S. perceptions and policies, not just towards China, but ultimately towards all of Asia and not to the benefit of U.S. interest.
That's it for this episode of the United States of Amnesia. Thank you for listening. We hope you learned something, and we hope you discovered new ways of looking at things you had already heard or thought about, or perhaps hadn't heard about. If you enjoyed it, that's great. If we made you mad, that's okay too. Either way, email us at usa.amnesia@gmail.com and let us know what you think. Also, let us know about anything you think we missed or got wrong. We'd like to know about that too. And of course, please like and subscribe and let your friends and neighbors know about us. We also have a website. It's www.usofamnesia.com. For Marshall, Mike, and myself, till next time.